that lies between you and alcohol is a dangerous position, so I will try to be fast. I want to start with three numbers. First number is 0, which is unfortunately the number of goals that the team I was rooting for scored last night. But I will say to you Spanish fans in this crowd, we still have the food and the beaches. Don't forget it. The second number is 0, and that's the number of women on this panel, which is not a fine thing, so I hope that the first questioners recognize it. And the third number is 1,222. Did I get that right?
Yeah.
And all I can say is if that's the number of pages that Facebook has on you, they're not doing very well. That was a joke. Did everybody see that? That was a joke. Okay. Let's talk about the rights and responsibilities of corporations when it comes to protecting, promoting free expression on the internet, and also to dealing properly with users. I always start these conversations by pointing out what I think is something obvious but which has gotten lost. And that is that any discussion about what's happening with corporations has to start with government. Because if governments all over the world, and I don't mean just the usual suspects, the Chinas, the Vietnams, the Syrias, and the Iraq, if governments all over the world weren't putting us in a position of what I call forced compliance, we might not be sitting here talking about these issues. This is no way to deny that corporations have rights and responsibilities in what they do. But I do want everybody to kind of start this off understanding that we didn't ask for this situation. And if we had our way about it, it would be a lot different. And we wouldn't have constant arguments with government. Okay, now that I've done the usual caveat, what are responsibilities? I will make 4 quick points. I believe that our number one responsibility as a corporation is to protect our users. I think that is the most vital thing we can do, no matter what services or products we are providing to them. If we fail in that, we fail them personally, we put them at risk, and we also tend to lose trust. If we lose trust, we lose business. And corporations don't want to lose businesses. Second thing, when it comes to responsibilities, in this case, is that I believe it is our responsibility to maximize free expression and access to information on the internet. And I use that word maximize very carefully because I think none of us in this room would argue, at least rationally, that there is full and extreme free expression. There are things that I think we all agree, such as child pornography, do not deserve to be seen. And although these can be used as an excuse to filter content, and I don't like it when they are, I do think that we have to agree that there's no way you can see everything that one person might want. Things that are not, shall we say, particularly good for the rest of society or the rest even of internet users to be exposed to. We can talk about specifics. A third responsibility. I think corporations have a responsibility to be advocates on these issues, not just passive. And what I mean by this is that I do believe that corporations have to lobby. They have to work together with human rights groups and others against governments that are trying to filter content or otherwise block the free flow of information. We can talk about the utility and the formation of the Global Network Initiative as an attempt to do this and to bring together people from all over the spectrum in order to increase leverage. Two of the things that we have done at Google that I would point to in particular are the publication of our transparency report, which attempts to show people where our services are being blocked around the world, and also show what governments are asking for how much information about users around the world. We think that transparency is a good thing, and we are working hard to make sure that other companies and hopefully down the road some governments actually follow the lead. The second thing that we believe in very strongly is data liberation. Data liberation, in fact, we have an entire unit in the company called the Data Liberation Front, whose job it is to make sure that if you want to take your data out of Google and you want to be able to do it easily, you can do that and move it to another service. So those are two, I think, concrete examples that we do. The last responsibility I would cite here before we get into the discussion is that I think corporations have a responsibility not to put what's called corporate social responsibility or human rights into a silo, to put them into a glossy report that comes out once a year that says, look how great we are in this area, but rather to fold their responsibilities into their everyday activities, be it their employees understanding what the company has signed up to in an agreement like the Global Network Initiative, or for employees operating in difficult countries where they're constantly challenged, given the support they're needed every day, rather than just support that's mouthed through that report that comes out once a year. I'll stop there.
Thanks to all three of you. So I'm going to start with one question just to kick us off, and then I'll open up the floor to you. And also, the three of you feel free to ask each other questions as well. So something I'd like to observe based on just your initial comments is that it seems that we have a really interesting dynamic between a claim that governments should be the starting point for protection of individuals, and in particular a European example of an attempt to create enforcement for data privacy through a governmental mechanism, with the idea that really it's up to, at a certain level, the civic mechanisms that we already have in place as the starting point for our enforcement of our rights. But at the same time, we have an individual who lives in a context that is basically stateless and has no legitimate or very little representation in the context in which he lives in terms of a government that actually represents his rights. And I always like to start a conversation with rights based on the position and the perception of the people who are most vulnerable in a given society or context, whether that's somebody who's stateless or somebody who is restricted through a situation of equity or displaced or any other perception of what vulnerability is, and there are myriad. And I wonder if we can kind of start out this conversation looking at this really different dynamic. You know, how do we accommodate a worldwide structure that is flexible enough to think about these two polarities? Any of you, all three, whoever wants to say.
On the first round, what's like most interesting in the whole discussion for me, wherever I am about talking about this thing, is that these corporations are totally blanking out different cultures, different markets, different nations, and that's like something I didn't hear from your response so far. Is, for example, Google has one privacy policy for all of the world, which will not reflect probably the free speech that's way bigger in the US than in Europe, like way bigger value, compared to, for example, privacy that's way bigger value in Europe. And then you go to other countries and it's going to be even worse than that, like from extremes. And I don't think that like first round was like kind of a new liberalization. If the government let us do whatever we can do, it's all going to be fine. I highly doubt that. I doubt it's going to get way worse than it is right now even. And this whole issue of trust, I personally think, at least from a Western European perspective, no one trusts Facebook anymore, but they're still pretty good in business. The reason for that is that they have a factual monopoly. If media anywhere else than that. So these ideas of trust work in a really free market where you have different competitors and you can really choose your provider. But if I am a corporation and I want to be found online, I have to be on Google. If I want to be a citizen and I want to interact on social media, I have to be on Facebook. So these regulations are not going to work. We've got to have something better than that.
Just reply on the women. I think some of the most leading authors or leading figures in this field are women. Rebecca McKinnon wrote the whole book on this, and Jillian Newark. So I think they should have been on the panel as well.
Rebecca declined to be on the panel, so let's be clear about that.
Number one, I asked Ivan to moderate this panel because I am moderating and running too many other things. And so it was a matter of a different kind of balance of me, just people getting sick of me. The other point is that we did have another female panelist who was planning to be on this panel from Yahoo, Ebele Kobe-Harris. She couldn't come due to medical reasons at the very last minute, but she was planning to be on the panel. So the fact that this is an all-male panel, and also given the nature of Global Voices and the amount of female leadership in Global Voices, I think that remark in the context of many conferences is useful, but in this particular context, it's probably not so useful.
Let's try
in the context, just back to the why censorship happens. Bob aside said that usually it's pressure from other governments that censor that. I've identified 4 reasons why censorship happens. I mean, I'm sure there are more if you really look into it, but 4. One is pressure from government, maybe from even the U.S. Treasury. Saying it shouldn't be, or from Iran, or from. The second is it costs much less to remove something that's been contested than to actually look into it. So cost plays a huge factor into why censorship happens. And blanket bans, Bluehost, took everything off anybody who's posting anything from Iran, and they actually a blanket ban is much easier to implement. The third reason is gaming. Lots of people game the reporting and the flagging mechanism of these things. You can report and you can. There have been cases of that happening, where bots or custom campaigns. The third or the fourth reason is misrepresenting the TOS, the terms of service. For example, pictures of portrait killing, or pictures of gruesome pictures, that would be normally taken down due to the content. However, in the context of political activity, it actually has relevance, and that could be misrepresenting. So these are the different aspects of why censorship happens and how we should go about it. And the last thing is that the onus on private companies is to react and to listen and to think. But it is the onus of activists and communities to demand that they can use the tools for their rights. They have to find, and they have to use it, and we see it happening where they push private companies to, and especially the Transparency Report is a brilliant report, but a brilliant initiative. It started 3 years ago, I think it was in 2000. Yeah, so, and that happened after, I'm sure, Google got a lot of cases through YouTube and email. So it's a reaction to a lot of things, and I think all the private companies should be doing this.